We need to have a conversation about what real emergencies actually look like, because you pretty much never want to take off into the woods as a response. Bugging out in that regard is pretty much always stupid. Let's get after it. I'm James Merritt, emergency manager and career soldier, and this is Readiness Nation. So I'm still seeing videos of guys talking about taking off into the woods if there's an emergency. This is pretty much always the wrong answer. So today we need to discuss what real-world emergencies actually look like, discuss why you shouldn't evacuate unless you have to, and then discuss what you should actually do if you need to evacuate. To discuss what emergencies actually look like, we'll start with the FEMA incident type tier list. FEMA has 5 incident types in their tier list, with type 5 being the lowest and type 1 being the highest. As you can see from the diagram, the primary considerations for these tiers are the amount of time the response is going to take and the amount of people required for the response. Type 5 incidents are small and easily resolvable by just a few responders and usually in not more than a few hours. Type 5 incidents would be things like a car accident or a house fire. Types 4 through 2 are mainly characterized by the phasing in of the elements of the incident command system. They take an increasing number of operational periods to bring the incident under control. They take an increasing amount of assets to respond to, ranging from municipal-level assets for a Type 4 up to state-level assets for a Type 2. And the level of personnel required also scales from dozens for a Type 4 up to hundreds for a Type 2. This range of incidents would include everything from active shooter incidents to chemical spills to tornadoes. Type 1 incidents are massive and complex disasters requiring national-level resources and thousands of responders. It will require the activation and utilization of all elements of the incident command system, and it will take an extended period of time to bring the incident under control. Type 1 incidents would be things like Hurricanes Katrina and Sandy, or 9/11. There are several takeaways to discuss here. First, you too need to be thinking about the full spectrum of possible incidents. Everyone who makes this kind of content is always talking about the end of the world, but very rarely do they ever talk about the things that are not the end of the world, but can be the end of your world if you're not prepared for them. Roughly 40,000 Americans are killed in car accidents annually. Additionally, roughly 40,000 people die in unintentional falls each year. That's about 1 every 13 minutes. So in the time it takes you to watch this video, someone somewhere in this country died in a car accident and someone else died in an unintentional fall. When assessing risk, the Army uses what's known as the composite risk matrix, which looks at the likelihood of an incident happening versus how detrimental it would be if it does. The highest impact category is deemed catastrophic, and if there's a possibility of death, an incident falls into this category. The highest probability category is frequent, which is categorized as continuous or regular occurrences. All of these individual emergencies are killing hundreds of people a day, every day. So they are both catastrophic and frequent, which assesses their risk to be extremely high. In the Army, after we assess the risk level, we have to develop a plan to mitigate it. Now, I know it's not fun or sexy to plan or, for that matter, execute comprehensive home and automotive safety programs, but out of all the things that can go wrong, these individual emergencies really are the most likely things to kill you and your family. That's why Phase 0 of the Individual Readiness Framework is not only about all the planning and preparation you'll need to do for all phases of your operation, but also includes significant prevention and mitigation efforts to protect you and your family from these individual emergencies. So for the rest of the tiers, there isn't a perfect one-for-one analogy between the incident types that FEMA identifies and the way you need to be thinking about incident types for your individual emergency management operation. But there are 4 additional distinct incident tiers that you need to consider. For your individual emergency management purposes, what would be considered Type 2 incidents are highly localized emergencies, that once you're out of the immediate vicinity, the emergency is over, at least for you. These would be emergencies like structural fires, chemical spills, active shooters, or terrorist attacks. In these instances, once you're out of the range of the effects of the emergency, you're no longer in any danger and you can go about your business. As such, to be able to effectively address individual emergency management Type 2 incidents, you simply need to have plans and, if need be, tools to be able to evacuate from wherever you might be when the incident occurs, and at most be able to withdraw all the way back to your home. Phase 1 of the Individual Readiness Framework addresses these types of incidents and is broken down into subphases 1 Alpha and 1 Bravo. Subphase 1 Alpha is about planning to evacuate wherever you might be when the incident transpires. Subphase 1 Bravo is about planning your tactical withdrawal back to your primary location, i.e. your house. Individual emergency management type 3 incidents are where we're getting into incidents that cause some level of disruption to the community. This disruption can be a straining of the rule of law, a disruption of utilities, or a disruption of supply chains. In these instances, you'll have to do what FEMA refers to as sheltering in place and what the US Army refers to as defending in place. Essentially, you want to go into a heightened security posture and start living off of your backup utilities and/or emergency supplies until things go back to normal. Phase 2 of the Individual Readiness Framework walks you through planning every part of defending in place. From planning security and defense, to logistical sustainment, to communications, to information gathering. Every planning consideration covered. So here's where we need to talk about why bugging out, in the sense of rucking up and taking off into the woods, is dumb. Even if you don't have any emergency supplies, you still want to stay in your house and shelter in place. Unless something forces you out of your home, you are always better served to stay in it. First and foremost, because your house itself protects you from sun, wind, rain, snow, insects, and animals. All things you need to contend with if you took off into the woods. Second, if it's too hot in your house without electric cooling, you're able to strip down without being vulnerable the way you would be in the woods. And if it's too cold in your house without heat, you literally have every blanket and piece of cold weather clothing you own in your house to keep you warm, versus whatever you could carry with you if you took off into the woods. Furthermore, you have all of the tools and non-electrical capabilities that you use to live right now at your house. You would only be able to take a small fraction of them with you if you tried to bug out. And finally, I'm going to wager that you have more food in your cupboards and pantry right now than you would be able to carry with you if you tried to take off into the woods. In short, everything you need for your survival is at your house. You just have degraded utilities after the incident. So it'd be far easier and you'd be far more successful to just put in place redundant utilities like a backup generator or a well than you would be to try to survive in the woods, especially if you've got a family in tow. So shelter in place or defend in place at your primary location unless something forces you out. But with that said though, if there ever is an official evacuation order, always follow it. I promise you, it is not a trick or a scam. The public hates evacuation orders. Politicians know that the public hates evacuation orders. So politicians are actually very reluctant to issue evacuation orders unless it's absolutely necessary. And there are most certainly incidents that would force you out of your home. And that's where individual emergency management type 4 incidents come into play. These are emergencies that would force you out of your primary location, but are not the end of the world. These would be things like a hurricane, a major chemical spill, weaponized sea burn effects, the failing of rule of law, or even a pandemic if your primary location is in a densely populated area. In instances like this, if you have a prepared secondary location, it'd be a good idea to evacuate to it. And seeing as how these aren't collapse events, you shouldn't have to make a full tactical withdrawal. A simple evacuation should suffice. Now, if you don't have a prepared secondary location, bugging out into the woods is still dumb. Because these incidents aren't the end of the world, their effects are localized to just your area or region. As such, the rest of the country is still functioning normally. So your best course of action is to evacuate to where everything is normal. If you have an in-law that's outside the affected area, but still relatively close, going and staying with them until things blow over is a good choice. If you don't have any family that meet that criteria, going to a hotel in the nearest town outside the affected area will be your next best course of action. Pre-identifying hotels where you would stay in each cardinal direction from your house and writing down their phone numbers and all the routes to get there on a paper map is a great idea. But what's a terrible idea is wandering off into the woods to try to survive in the wilderness. Like when the New Palestine chemical spill happened. My boss at the time's parents lived on a farm right outside of New Palestine. They were so much inside the affected area that their livestock died off. So in that case, the right answer was for them to go stay with him in Columbus, not to try to survive in the wilderness. Making an evacuation is a valid course of action. Making a tactical withdrawal is a valid course of action. But bugging out into the wilderness is never a valid course of action. Finally, individual emergency management type 5 incidents are full collapse events. In these cases, you'll have to make a tactical withdrawal to a prepared secondary location. which is covered in Phase 3 of the Individual Readiness Framework. You'll then have to go into the strongest defensive posture you can while the world dies. This is covered in Phase 4. And finally, you'll have to conduct subsistence agricultural operations until something resembling civilization reemerges. This is covered in Phase 5. I'll go into collapse events in full detail in the next video. But even in the end of the world, taking off into the woods still isn't the right answer, because you won't be able to hunt and trap your way through the apocalypse. And we'll get into that in a future video as well. And that's going to be it for me. So if you're finding this information useful, give me the old controlled pair on the like and subscribe buttons. And if you're finding this information useful enough that you want to buy me a beer about it, there's a link to my Patreon in the description. If you're watching on YouTube and you're finding this channel useful, head on over to my companion channels, Readiness Nation GQC and Readiness Nation Reacts, to get all of my content. If you're watching on any other platform, all content will be uploaded to the Readiness Nation main channel. And with that said, until next time, I'm James Merritt for Readiness Nation, reminding you to always be the master of your fate and the captain of your soul.